for being here today on this Wednesday afternoon. It's 3 o'clock, so I think that's a great time for us to get fired up to talk about some tense moments in the classroom. What do you say? I'm Allison Boye, Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. For those of you who I may not have met before, those of you who are familiar faces, I'm glad to see you again. My plan for us today is to think about what hot moments might be and why they happen in the classroom. Obviously, we'll consider some strategies for dealing with them in the moment when they happen, and take a look at some other ideas for hopefully helping us to prevent them in the future. Whether or not that's possible.
On the south side of the building.
I'm gonna mute that. Okay. So before we begin, just a few things I want to kind of lay on the table for us today. First of all, please make sure your microphone is muted when you are not speaking to avoid any distracting noise for others. We're going to use the chat to share questions and discussions. Be mindful not to dominate. And two that I think are probably the most important pieces today. First, we are not here to engage in student bashing, though it's totally okay to feel frustrated by your students sometimes. I know we all feel it, but that's not what we're here to do today. And then finally, whether we like it or not, there really are no easy solutions. There's no one-size-fits-all panacea for human conflict. So we'll talk about some strategies for kind of mitigating these moments, but the bottom line is there's just not an easy fix for it. So you kind of have to just put a lot of tools in your toolkit and, you know, think about what's going to work best for you in that particular moment. Okay. So before we really dive in, I thought it would be a good idea for us to share what kinds of tense situations or hot moments we've all experienced in our own classrooms and other circumstances. So I've created a shared document. I put the link in the chat for you as well, or you can use the QR code here. I'm hoping you might go to this document. It's totally anonymous. You don't have to put your name on it, but maybe share an example of a hot moment that you have experienced as an instructor in the classroom, just so that we can kind of share with one another the things that we've all been through and kind of realize the variety of things that can happen and realize that we're not alone at the same time. And while you're writing, please also take a minute to look at what other people are sharing too. So I think, as we can see here, these kinds of moments are absolutely not uncommon, right? They happen to all of us, and we can't necessarily predict when they're going to happen. We may not always understand at first why they're happening. But I think just a scan of all of the things that we're sharing here in this document shows us that, you know, I think this is just part of the job, and it's human nature too, right? Conflict is just part of being human. I think Kevin said that in the chat. Yeah. And there's student to student conflict and student to instructor conflict. So we're going to talk about all of these things here in just a minute. Before we get to that, I also want us to take a minute to consider a real-life case study. This is a real example of an incident that happened at a college right here in Texas. This took place, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago, wherein a professor decided to fail his entire class. So let's start by looking at the email from the professor. This isn't the entire email. I had to excerpt pieces of it. But let's look at this for a second. Take a minute to read it. I've highlighted, I think, some key moments in the email. We have the professor highlighting seeing cheating, students saying some rude things to him, telling him to chill out, go back and teach, using some foul language. The professor says there have been some hurtful and untrue rumors circulated. There have been fights between students. Yeah, wow, right, Rebecca? Absolutely. So he flat out says, none of you, in my opinion, given the behavior in this class, deserve to pass or graduate, as you do not in any way embody the honor that the university holds graduates should have within their personal character. So he says he is officially walking away from this course. And that he will not only no longer be teaching the course, and that everyone will be awarded a failing grade. I'm sure many of you will line up to appeal and claim the above unjust, unfair, and other such terms in your victim lexicons, just as you do when you receive grades you don't like. So that's kind of the thrust of his email. So now, here is the flip side of the coin. Here is correspondence from one student in the class. So just know this is one student in the class. This is not everybody, but it provides a different perspective. So the student notes that some of the rude comments were said by one person in the class who was accused of cheating. Then things got out of hand and that student left the class. The person who called the professor a rude name, that happened once, and it was not multiple times. It was outside of class. The student notes there was one other person who complained about their grade, and that there were only 3 people responsible for this bad behavior that the instructor has pointed out. Then we also see that the professor, according to the student, did not give them a rubric or any kind of clear directions for a major group project they were working on. The student describes one group's presentation. They tried, they did the best they could, they had some good points, but ultimately were really misguided. The professor said, that's not a strategy, that's operational effectiveness, and then gave them a bad grade, even though they had no clue what they were supposed to be doing. Then the student points the finger at the professor, saying that they constantly made supposedly crude and inappropriate remarks, did some other inappropriate things, and concludes the statement by saying, I felt like I was being held hostage. Okay, so this is an ugly situation. So here's my question for you. Acknowledging that we understandably do not have all of the details, we were not there ourselves, we do have 2 conflicting perspectives about what happened in this class. So for the chat, what seems to have happened here? What's your takeaway from thinking about this situation? What have the students done? What has the professor done? What went wrong? What are your thoughts? It's a lot to unpack, I know. Yeah, Tiffany, that's a great insight. Breakdown in communication and empathy on both sides. Yeah, it's a lot to unpack for sure. Definitely some miscommunication here. The professor failed the whole class when not everyone is at fault. Yeah, that's problematic for sure. Definitely not the best response. Yeah, the professor broad brushed the class. There's also, Ava says, a grand scale of immaturity on a few people. Yeah, and that happens, right? Assuming the student is correct, it seems as if the instructor channeled a lot of frustration, potentially from life in general, into this one class event. I think that's a great observation. Yeah, some strong personalities, no rubrics. Seems like there's some lack of clarity when it comes to expectations from the students, and they felt frustrated by that. Why are grades and cheating being discussed publicly? That's a great question, John. Didn't seek help from the dean, didn't address academic dishonesty. It seems, yeah, I think it seems like there were a lot of steps that were missed here until it just exploded at the end. I don't know what point in the semester this happened. But I think y'all are hitting the nail right on the head. We have poor communication. We have some potentially explosive personalities that were clashing. We have some broad brush ramifications, right, that are not appropriate for everyone. The professor needs to have a class session to set the maturity level of the class. Yeah, some individual conferences, absolutely. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that should have been done differently here. So let this percolate in the back of your mind, and we're going to come back to it, okay? Bottom line, don't do what this professor did, P.S. If you leave with nothing, leave with that, okay? All right, so triggers. I want to talk about triggers for a moment, and the kinds of things that can set off some of these really explosive moments or just tense moments in our classrooms. You've probably heard about triggers out there in the media, right? You might even have some preconceived notions of things like triggers and trigger warnings. But I want to think for a minute about how they're actually defined. So triggers are instantaneous responses to stimuli without accompanying conscious thought. Okay, that's, I think, an important piece here. They might be disproportionate to the original interaction or stimulus. They can cause us to be disoriented or de-skilled. The way I kind of think about it is that these are things that kind of make us lean into what I call our lizard brains, right? Those things that just kind of set us off and we temporarily just lose our minds, right? We all have those things. I think about it in terms of my cat. Like when I'm petting him and he's happy, and then all of a sudden he goes lizard brain and he just lashes out and runs away, right? We all do this. So here's another question for you. What are some things that might trigger your students or you? Because I think we saw several of these things in that case study we just looked at. What are some potential triggers? Again, let's see some responses in the chat for this. Yeah, daily life for sure. Things that are happening outside of the classroom that we bring into the classroom with us or that our students bring in. Think about what was triggering the students in the case study. They had some problems with what the professor was doing, it seems. Yeah, Tiffany, that's definitely a trigger for me too. Do I need to know this? Is this important? Did I miss anything important? Nope, we just sat around twiddling our thumbs, right? Yeah, stress, low grades, changes with no advance notice. Yeah, definitely. Another student being disruptive or disrespectful, maybe not aware that that's what they're doing, right? Yeah, sensitive topics of all kinds, right? Abusive behavior, racial discrimination, conflict in belief systems. We definitely saw some of that in the stories that you all shared in the document. Lack of information. Yeah, Ava, that's a great one. Not responding to their academic needs. Unwholesome language used by the professor in the classroom, or conversely, if other students are using it, that might upset the professor. Yeah, lack of clarity, lack of detail, needs a detailed syllabus, a clear assignment, accusatory language, self-assured position based on false information. Yeah, definitely. I'll tell you, one of my triggers is when somebody talks to me like I'm a dummy. If you want to make me angry, please do that. That is definitely probably one of my biggest triggers. So, there's a lot to keep in mind, but it's important to kind of be aware of these things. So when one of these triggers happens in the classroom, there's a cycle that takes place, right? So essentially the stimulus, whatever it is, it might be a phrase, it might be an ugly look from a student. It could be an attitude, it could be a specific action. It stirs up some sort of interpersonal issue for the person who's being triggered based on their own experiences, their own backgrounds, maybe a trauma that they have, maybe something that just happened before they came to class. We don't know. And then that creates a lens through which they perceive the moment, right? And then that shapes how they respond. That's what sends them into lizard brain mode. And that is what can then lead to one of these heated moments, right, that we're talking about. And then that can cause another trigger. So I wanted us to really take a moment and think about this cycle and how we all fall into it at one moment or another. And I think it's important to recognize that these moments, they don't necessarily arise out of the ether, right? They're coming from something real to that person, from their truth, whatever it might be, experiences, emotions. Even if we don't see them, even if we don't understand them in that moment ourselves, or if they conflict with our own emotions and our beliefs. And that certainly happens a lot in the classroom too, especially if you're teaching some kind of sensitive material. So just, again, this is all to get back to that idea of let's not assume harm, right? Let's not assume bad intentions all the time. Things just happen. So the reason we're here today is because these heated moments have some very real consequences for the teaching and learning process. They disrupt it, they can erode the learning environment through things like loss of time in the class when we need to pause to manage them. They create distraction from our lessons and our activities. They cause stress for us as the instructor, for other students in the class, anxiety, discomfort. They can create feelings of loss of trust between students, between the student and the instructor. We certainly saw that happen in the case study we looked at. And then in some of the worst moments, they can potentially make others feel unsafe in the classroom, whether physically or psychologically. So it's really important to be prepared to deal and manage some of these things when they happen. So now we're going to shift and take a look at some things that we can do in the moment if one or more of our students get heated during class. But there's one rule above all others that you have to keep in mind, and that is this: do not ignore it. Ignoring it, hoping that things will go away, while a totally understandable impulse. And when I say that, I get it. Trust me, I get it. I really hate conflict. So it is a strong impulse within me personally to want to ignore those kinds of things. But if we do that, unfortunately, that's just going to perpetuate the problem, right? And it can frustrate other students whose learning is being disrupted by whatever's happening. So we have to deal with it in some way. So if we can't ignore it, what do we do? Well, first of all, when tensions arise, you got to let yourself take a moment, right? You got to pause, breathe, and assess whether you need to address the issue right away, immediately. Maybe you need to take it up separately with individual students. Maybe you need to let it sit and then come back to it and address it in another class period. Maybe it's as simple as just counting to 10 before speaking or acting, especially if you're feeling yourself start to get really agitated in the moment. If you feel like you're unprepared to deal with a question or a comment right away, let your students know that you're going to come back to it later, okay? So that they don't feel like, again, like you're ignoring it or that you're dropping it. And if it's something that is so disruptive that you feel like class can't continue, perhaps you need to think about ending class and then coming back to things in the next class period, okay? So assess before you act. So next, you might think about acknowledging that the other person's perspective, that's their reality, even if we don't understand it. And an extended invitation to them to clarify and explain further, to help provide you with some more information about where they're coming from, as well as help them become aware of what they're saying or doing that is causing some problems or being disruptive, okay? So here's a few examples that you might, of ways you might express this invitation. So things like, could you say more about that and elaborate? Sounds like you have a really strong opinion about this. Could you tell me why? I hear you saying this. Is that what you really meant to say? So on and so forth. So kind of expressing that you want to see their side of things, that you're listening to them, because students are just going to get more agitated if they feel like you're not listening to them, right? They want to feel heard. They want to have a voice. It can also be really helpful to reframe the issue and create a different way of viewing the situation. So you might say things like, is there another way to look at this? Or let's try saying this in a different way. Or I'm wondering what message this is sending. Now, again, keep in mind that some of these things are going to apply to certain situations and maybe not to others. So again, just think of this as a lot of tools in your toolkit. But reframing it for them can be helpful. Also beneficial is to identify and directly articulate what is problematic about the student's comment or about their behavior. They might not realize it. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't, right? So again, some examples of things you might say. I could easily imagine that this might feel like an insult to other people who feel X. Or when you said X, I felt like this. Or others might find this problematic in this way because, okay? So again, just kind of helping them see how what they're doing is affecting others, okay? Changing the energy, I think, is really important and can be a great strategy to provide a space for some more productive re-engagement with kind of the important content of what's happening in the class, especially if things have gotten particularly uncomfortable. So some ideas that can really help diffuse the situation are just asking students to pause for a minute in silence, right? Let's take a breath and process what's happening. This is one that I really love. Stop and write. Ask students to, while they're taking a pause, to stop and write individually for a couple of minutes about what's happened, how they feel about it. Is there something they feel like they want to say, but they can't say it out loud? You might ask them to think about how they can connect it to course material if it's related in that way. You can allow these writings to be private. You can also collect them anonymously and use them to help you make a plan for how to address things in the next class period. It helps give you some insight into how the entire class is being affected by what's happening. You could even invite students to do something kinesthetic, right? Let's move, let's stand up and stretch for a minute and kind of shake this moment off before we dive back into the course content. That can break the tension, refocus their energy. And if any students are particularly upset, you can let them know it's okay if they feel the need to leave. Just be sure you follow up with them later, okay? During discussions, it's really wise to depersonalize any positions of disagreement that have emerged, because that can help minimize kind of unproductive personal defensiveness. You know, when we start to take a stand about something and we get all up in our own emotions and our own beliefs, then we can really start to butt heads and start to feel defensive if we feel like people are arguing with us. So depersonalizing things and exploring multiple perspectives or trying to find common ground on the issue can help invite everyone else into the conversation, especially if you're doing something like discussing particularly sensitive topics. So some examples here. You know, we've heard perspectives from this person and that person. What are some other responses we might consider? Or how do you think others might feel about this particular view? Acknowledging that other people feel really deeply about the situation that's being discussed, right? And again, depersonalize it. Instead of saying something like, well, what Allison said, say something like, this disagreement about this topic or the use of this phrase or word in this context, right? So taking the name out of it can help diffuse things a little bit. I also think it is super smart to connect things back to course content whenever you can. That can create a really productive and teachable moment. If you can do things like have students think about what the big emotion that's happening around this topic or about the situation suggests about how important it is, or how can we anchor this discussion back in course materials? Like, well, what do you think this scholar would say about this argument that we're having? Or maybe you can connect it back to some learning objectives you have for the course, like critical thinking or perspective taking, framing an argument, you name it. So how can you spin it back to the course material? Now, I think this could be a hard one, but sometimes you just need to give students the benefit of the doubt. When they say things that seem to devalue or discount other people or perspectives. Remember what we said about triggers earlier in the session. We all have a lens that colors how we see the world, and how we react to it. And we may or may not be aware of it. Like I said, this is not always easy to do. So thinking about how you might be able to have a little empathy for them, like we talked about in the chat. So some turns of phrase might be things like, I don't think this is what you intended, but this is what was conveyed. Or you may not realize how that sounded. Or, gosh, I know you're trying to tell a joke, but it's problematic in this way. Okay. If you're caught by surprise, or you feel like things need to be addressed further beyond what you can do in a single class period, and that happens, right? Maybe you just need to consider revisiting it at another time in the next class period. Maybe it's about checking in with students outside of the class, whoever was involved, maybe in person or via an email later. Let them know you're not ignoring things and that you want to see things sorted out productively for the class. And then also think about addressing the class as a whole, whether or not they were specifically involved in what happened. So maybe you say, hey, I want to go back to something that happened last time. I want us to break that down a little bit. Our class is a learning community. I want to make sure it stays a positive one for you. Or, how can I better support you in this class? Again, a lot of different ways that you can say things. But checking in with students, revisiting it later if you need to, talking outside of class, these are all good options. Okay, so we've talked about what happens when students get heated. Now we need to look in the mirror a little bit and reflect on what we should do when we get a little bit agitated, because that happens too. I know, I've been there. So just as those kind of student-generated tense moments, we've got to do the same thing here if they are generated by us. Take a short break to recenter and reflect on the situation. Why are we reacting this way? Why are we getting upset, right? Why is our lizard brain activated right now? P.S. This is also a really good thing to do before firing off an email when you may or may not be a little bit agitated. This has definitely saved my hide on more than one occasion. This can go a long way to ensuring it doesn't happen again, and you'll be glad you did. So take a minute, take a pause, just like we do with our students. So next, as painful as it might be, address the moment with your class, own it. Maybe you need to admit to a mistake. Maybe you need to apologize, depending on what happened, right? Gosh, yesterday this happened. I raised my voice instead of doing this. It wasn't okay the way I reacted, or I didn't follow through on this particular thing that I said that I was going to do for you, or I'm sorry I got frustrated. It's okay, right? Sometimes we just have to own these things, and students will appreciate that, okay? It's hard, I know. But if you lost your temper or you got agitated because of something like student incivility, which we, again, saw a lot of examples of that in the shared document we worked on earlier, or maybe it's some sort of behavioral infraction or something like that, this could be a good opportunity to review some relevant class expectations with your students. As a few people mentioned putting things in the syllabus, we're going to get to that. This is a good moment to bring that syllabus back out, right? Point out, well, here are our behavioral expectations, right? This is what was expected of you on this assignment, or this is the grading breakdown. You knew what the deadline was. Things that are in black and white can be helpful to remind students of those things. Finally, you have to let yourself off the hook sometimes too. Don't beat yourself up if you lose your cool one time, right? You got to remember, you're human. Humans have emotions. We have those experiences that shape our reactions. Nobody's perfect as much as we want to be. Now, if losing your cool with your students is something that happens quite frequently, or if you are frequently at loggerheads with your students for whatever reason, like it seems like that might have been the case with the case study that we looked at. That clearly wasn't just a one-off incident, right? There might be something bigger at play here in the student-teacher relationship. And that probably needs to be explored further. And if there's one particular student who's continuously creating disruptions or being disrespectful or whatever the case might be, maybe that's a case for the Dean of Students office. Maybe it's worthwhile to have a conversation with them. In the handout that I emailed to all of you earlier today, There are links to all kinds of college resources. You all know about the Dean of Students, you know about strategies of behavioral intervention, the SOBI care team. There's more information for you about those things there too. So again, you're not alone in this. So lastly, I want to take a look at some practices that hopefully can help us prevent such situations in the future, because that's really what we want. We don't want to have these situations. We want to plan for them and hopefully create an environment where they don't happen if possible. So that's what we'll think about right now. So the first two strategies here are really mindsets. You've got to know yourself and your own personal triggers first and foremost. And we talked about some of our own triggers earlier. So think about those. Everyone has things that push their buttons. And if you know what causes your own emotional response to something, you can more successfully manage those emotions and responses if something happens in the classroom. This can also sometimes help prevent you from imposing your own beliefs or personal views on students. Again, if you're discussing some of those really sensitive topics or concepts that might butt up against students' personal beliefs. And then you also have to know your students. You have to be mindful of where they're coming from and manage your own expectations for your students. So by that, I mean, if you're teaching traditional age students, right, students who are 18 to 25, be aware of their developmental level. Some of them, their brains aren't fully formed yet. Even though they're technically adults, their brains may not be there yet. So they may have less sophisticated ways of thinking about really complicated issues or other areas where people might have differences of opinion. And as such, they may have difficulty perceiving that there can be more than one legitimate opinion about something or about an issue that may exist, right? They're still kind of learning about the shades of gray versus black and white thinking. Other students might be coming to your classroom with very concretized belief systems. And some topics that we address in the college classroom are pretty complicated and might cause some cognitive dissonance for those students who are used to only one way of thinking about something. And that's difficult. That's really difficult for students. Again, we also don't know what's happening in their daily lives outside of the classroom, just like they don't know what's happening in our daily lives. So we don't know what complicated things might be happening for them outside of the classroom. Also, things that we find rude and disrespectful, like, for instance, texting during class, might not seem rude to them, right? It's just normal to them. They might not realize that others perceive it as disrespectful or rude or disruptive. All of these things can lead to heated moments. So you got to know yourself, you got to know your students, okay? And just be ready for those things. Now, here's what that professor in the case study didn't do, right? You've got to provide clear classroom policies, have those behavioral expectations clearly articulated in your syllabus from the very start. You have to lay that foundation for them. You might think of it as a statement about the kind of classroom environment that you hope to create with and for your students. You might also think about things like having a very clear grade dispute policy or a late work policy, things that clearly outline the rules, your expectations, and the repercussions for infractions, okay? But along with having those really clear policies, I am also a very strong believer, and the research supports this, share your rationale for those policies. Be transparent with your students. Let them know the why behind your rules, right? So that they know that they're not arbitrary, that you have a very good reason for these things, right? They're carefully crafted, and they're all in an effort to create the best learning environment and situation possible, okay? It's also a really good idea to make sure you have some guidelines and structure, especially if you're engaging in a lot of discussion with your students. And especially if that discussion is going to touch on some difficult topics. Develop some ground rules for discussion and class participation. You can develop these yourself, or you can even develop them with your students so that they kind of have a voice in the crafting of those policies and those ground rules. Propose a few key guidelines for them that will keep the conversation moving forward out of any hot moments that might happen. So things like no personal attacks, an openness to hearing a range of perspectives, accountability, etc. On the handout that I provided to you earlier, I've included some sample discussion guidelines that you are welcome to adapt if you are interested in that, along with some guidelines for how you might collaborate with students on creating some ground rules together with them. Furthermore, it can be especially helpful to prepare your students and yourself, of course, for any upcoming potentially difficult topics that are around the bend, right? And in the process, then that's when you can remind them of those ground rules and those policies that have been established. You can also plan ahead for learning activities that might also help kind of pave the way for those difficult discussions. So if you think a conversation has the potential to get heated because of conflicting perspectives, you might plan some preliminary activities or questions designed to help students practice some critical thinking or reciprocal communication or things like that. So again, kind of preparing everyone for what's to come rather than surprising them with it. Lastly, we have to strive to be respectful of our own students' perspectives, even when it's difficult, and I know it is, y'all. We also have to remember that our behavior influences theirs. Again, think about that case study. That is definitely an example of a professor's behavior probably influencing the student's behavior. Faculty can really inadvertently provoke a heated moment in the classroom by humiliating or invalidating a student perspective, like remarking that a question is ridiculous or unworthy of an answer, or by making snide remarks, or other negative behaviors, things like repeatedly showing up late to class, or keeping students late when class is supposed to be over, not grading assignments or providing feedback in a timely manner, punishing many for the acts of a few. We saw an example of that. I worked with a professor many, many years ago who thought that he was very, very funny and told a lot of jokes in the classroom. And he had a very sarcastic sense of humor, very dry. But what he didn't realize was that his students thought he was rude. And he was totally unaware of how his behavior was affecting them. And they, in turn, were being disrespectful of him. So they were kind of feeding each other. The bottom line here is incivility begets incivility. And that's true for both faculty and students. We affect each other. So we have to be mindful of what we model for them. And hopefully they'll reflect back on us in positive ways. All right. So I just did a whole bunch of talking. So I want to turn back to you. You've had that case study percolating in the back of your head. With all of this information on hand, all of the things that we just discussed, let's revisit our angry professor and angry students from that case study. So again, back to the chat. What could or should that professor have done differently at any point in time, either before, during, or after the incident, or when things that were happening in his class, when things really started to go awry? What would have been a better, more productive behavior or action than, quitting and failing the entire class? How could he have prevented that? Rubric, absolutely. I am always a fan of a rubric, and obviously the students wanted one too. Yeah, definitely, Diana. Address issues as they came up, right? He ignored it for too long. It became a bigger problem than maybe it needed to be. Providing clear expectations for student behavior. Clear expectations for assignments would have prevented some frustration from the students. Yeah, listen to the students. He obviously wasn't doing that. Having a class discussion before distributing the grades. Love that idea. Pam, that's a great one. Yeah, Lisa, he definitely should have documented the student situations and spoken with somebody higher than him. That would have been very smart. Yeah, quit blame shifting for sure. Yeah, let's talk to an associate dean. Let's talk to a dean. Let's talk to the dean of students. Yeah, Tiffany, that's a great idea. Let's maybe make some one-on-one appointments with students. It's according to that one student, it sounded like it was maybe the acts of just a few bad actors in the class. So maybe he should have had some one-on-one conversations with them. Let's not make it a problem for the entire class, right? Yeah, definitely. So there were so many things that this professor could have done differently that might have impacted his students' behavior, and it wouldn't have come to this giant explosion, right? So I think kind of the moral of today's story is that people are complicated. People are messy. And there's no easy solution, right? Like I said at the start of this, there's not a cure-all for conflict. We're always going to have it, but hopefully some of the things that we've talked about you can take with you, and it can help you ideally prevent some problems in the classroom, but also deal with them when they inevitably happen. Even if we have all of these great things that we've done in advance, people still have personalities that we can't control. So we have to really be mindful of how we address them in the moment. We have a few minutes left. What are some questions that you have or ideas you want to share with the group before we wrap things up here? I see a couple of comments right now about how sharing with colleagues, talking to other faculty for mentoring and advice, always a great idea. Sharing with others. Question, is there a training for faculty where they can role play to learn classroom management skills? I currently do not have one, but if that is something that is of interest to people, let me know in the chat and I can certainly look into that. Julie, yeah, that's a great idea. Offering an apology. Allison, how good of an actress are you? I'll let it be known I was a theater major as an undergraduate. So, I could brush off those skills if I needed to. How to deal with difficult people. Student or professor? I was a student. I've taught drama. I have, but I have not taught acting. What else? Other questions or stories you want to share? All right. Well, if anything occurs to you that you want to talk about further, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I always say, I don't always have the answer. I frequently don't have the answer, but I'm always happy to help you think through things. I might be able to point you to some resources, or just listen, if you need to vent about something, I can do that too. On the slide here is a look at some upcoming CTL webinars. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the CTL YouTube channel. If you have any other questions about anything at all, don't hesitate to let me know. And thanks so much for being here today, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.